Hi, Fia. Um, can you hear me decently? I've tried regulating the audio, so I hope it's like you don't hear the computer and you hear my voice, but okay, that's good. I guess you're the first one here. So, yeah, I don't know if other people are gonna join. This is kind of an improvised stream, but I did it mostly to answer some questions from uh, the community. I can't really answer production related questions. That's why I put no print and distribution questions in the title. Uh, and mostly today is kind of to see whether this kind of thing can work and how tiring it is for me. I'd like to do it more often, but there's quite a bit of work to do. So mm, yeah, I thought you were 107. I did try to pick a time that was kind of okay for everyone. It's an English stream, so I tried to pick something that could work a little bit for everyone. I had noticed that this kind of time of the day, people tended to be quite active, and I asked on the server, and it seemed like it could work. But then again, maybe we today we discovered that it doesn't work as a choice of time of the day. But anyway, since you are here, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. I think the video will also be recorded, so some people might catch it later, and maybe they will find it useful. Yeah, I know you've asked a lot. Um, to be honest, uh, my idea is to use the videos to explain a bit more clearly, maybe some of the ideas, or because I've seen people have fairly regular questions or doubts, which cannot really be answered by a short FAQ or just a message. So those work better as a conversation. And um, the people in Italy have the weekly or almost weekly um, episodes that I do with the publisher, but we don't have anything like that in English, and so I thought, well, let's try, mostly because for me, talking like this during a stream is fairly easier than typing a precise question, a precise answer, or a comment, especially um, if the question appears again and again. Then you could maybe point to the video, or I don't know. I think I explain myself in a different way when I'm talking to a camera or directly to people by voice. I do see that there are some more people coming in, at least unless Twitch is lying. So, oh, hi, Baido. Pleasure to see you here. Um, Once again, welcome, and feel free to ask any questions or if there are any topics that you like to chat about. I'm only saying no to questions about print or distribution because I would need the publisher here to actually give answers about that. Um, and thanks Churarara for the following. I think I have the notification turned off. I did set up the various stream things a while ago, like I think more than 2 years ago, and probably everything has to be redone. I stream so rarely that basically I made this little frame for today, and I have just the PDF open here, so it's really very bare bones. Oh, Fabula history, how the project started and has been developed. Yeah, that's a question for. The answer is basically yeah, 7 years at this point. I started working on it when I was still in university. Uh, of course, what I mean with this is writing notes in a notebook, and I always wanted to play. I was always fascinated by JRPG style fantasy. Um, Both because Final Fantasy X was actually one of the first video games I stumbled upon, alongside Pokemon, like many people of my generation. I am 30, by the way, so I was born in '92. And hi, Marco. Um, so yeah, basically I tried and tried and tried, and this wasn't really something I was aware of, but when I played Pathfinder or Dungeons and Dragons, like my big issue with D&D, which I began playing only during high school, because I had played other games, other role playing games before, uh, especially Warhammer Fantasy. But yeah, when I met D&D, and I was told that it was a high fantasy kind of game. Hi Serpit. Um, I was expecting what I now realize was more of an anime JRPG fantasy game. I expected big, huge, cool powers. I expected fighters and warriors that could slice through a golem with a single stroke of the blade. And mechanically speaking, I expected elements and damage types to have an importance because the other games that I had played, it wasn't really relevant. Like if a fire spell would tell you that it would burn, but it wasn't, labeled as fire damage, ice damage. So I expected vulnerabilities, resistances, and stuff like that to be relevant. Uh, but that was me just misunderstanding completely what the origin of Dungeons and Dragons was. Like literally the history, the heritage of the game. And so I tried and tried and tried to kind of turn Dungeons and Dragons into a Final Fantasy ish game, but it never worked. And then I just moved on to completely different stuff. I played bits of systems from Fantasy Flight, especially Star Wars, and then I encountered the indie games. So both the stuff from the oh yeah, no, I don't think I'm gonna, yeah. um so yeah, basically what happened was when I came back with all that experience, I realized that I had been doing things wrong for a long time. And what I mean with wrong was inefficiently. I was trying to take a very complex system based on a series of expectations and trying to make it do something that it really wasn't meant to do. Uh, and then I also began reading and playing tabletop RPGs made in Japan. I encountered Ryutama, I encountered Shinobigami, Sword Ward, Arian Road, and basically Ryutama, there were a few things that stuck with me and that eventually turned it into the basis of Fabula Ultima. And I guess the way that stats worked and how status effects were tied to the size of your stats, that was probably the biggest thing. And then what really, really, really cemented into me that something like Fabula could exist was playing Ryutama with friends, and Ryutama has the shared world creation process, similarly to Fabula Ultima. And the setting that we made wasn't really that good for Ryutama. Like it was a bit too focused around conflict and big important stuff, while Ryutama tends to be more of a chill, tranquil travel experience. Like you have adventures, but they are more of a Ghibli adventure than a Final Fantasy adventure. But the kind of world that came out was so perfect and so tied to the characters, which is exactly what happens in JRPGs. Like unless you think of Final Fantasy XIV, for instance, which is an MMO, you really, at least I personally, don't think that sequels make that much sense in a JRPG unless you begin adding new pieces to the world, because each character really represents a the themes and the characteristics of a given region, a given faction. Like world and characters are the same, which is something that I I see I see less of in like games such as, I don't know, Skyrim or Baldur's Gate or Planescape Torment, and in general in D&D. D&D has this elaborate canon, these words, and when I mean D&D, actually, this extends to many traditional role-playing games, because writers tend to tell you a story, tell you the story of a world, tell you the story of important NPCs, and your adventurers are kinda, involved into what happens. But in JRPGs, the world and the characters, like, they are generally exhausted within the game. You start with a complex world, but the story isn't the story of how that world works. It's the story of how a group of people who represent all the ways of life of this kind of world, which is a world in conflict, find a way to communicate with each other and to bring the world to a more hopeful tomorrow. At the end of a classic RPG campaign, the world has changed usually, but it rarely changed because the player characters decided to do something, you know. And no, it's not necessarily peace via fighting, because that's another important thing. Usually, if you diverge the JRPG style from the gameplay element of grinding enemies and killing thousands of monsters to get XP. Like if you only focus on the cutscenes, which are what actually happens in the story, but then again, in Fabula Ultima and in tabletop RPGs, everything is a cutscene. What does this mean? It means that, for instance, it's important to be merciful because in cutscenes, JRPG heroes tend to be pretty merciful. Uh, even then, even though like during the rest of the game they just defeat hundreds of enemies without breaking a sweat, just because you have to farm experience and you have to farm items. And that's also why in Fabula Ultima you don't get experience for fighting. You get experience from using Fabula points, which means expressing yourself and taking the story into your hands, which is why when people say that they don't get why Fabula points can be used to alter the story, I mean, that shows pretty clearly that they haven't understood why there is a cost in Fabula points. It's not about balance, it's about psychology. It's about I'm spending a resource that I have obtained by being defeated or rolling really poorly and having a twist of fate inflicted upon me, or having seen dark forces in action. So, struggle gives you Fabula points, and you use them to overcome or to shape the world. And something in the world that has been shaped not just by the conversation at the table, but through a Fabula point carries a different impact. And also, Fabula points contribute to experience. And the other way you get experience is through Ultima points, so basically by eroding the plot armor of villains. Technically, you could have an entire Fabula Ultima campaign without really fighting, and absolutely you can have a campaign without killing anyone, because when you reduce people to 0 HP, well, if they are NPCs, if they are common NPCs, you decide their fate, so you don't have to kill them. You decide their fate. It means you could say that they have a change of heart, or they surrender, or they flee, or they are cleansed from whatever evil influx that was making them behave, destructively. And if they are villains, they can just use Ultima points. And you see, Turgeman, this is not really a conversation about what you can do, but it's a conversation about what the game hopes that you do. I don't want to say the game wants you to do, and bear in mind, it's interesting because while I have written the book has challenged me. My first campaign with Fabula Ultima, I made many mistakes, and as a game master, I was far too controlling. I wrote the book because I tend to make games to kind of discuss or express a kind of tension that I have within me. And in this case, Fabula Ultima is about authority, control, and centralized authority. Do we need a strong leader? Do we need a single person who takes power into their hands? Where does that lead us? What Fabula Ultima tries to express is that villains are the ones who try to change the world by themselves, while heroes cannot do so. Heroes, by definition, have to work together in Fabula Ultima because the math is against them, substantially. So the positive force is a force that cannot enact change by itself, but needs to come to compromise with others. And so I really want to drive the point that the game is about challenging the traditional relations of authority that we have in a tabletop RPG. And it kind of intersects with the fact that JRPGs, in at least the what for me are the most classical JRPGs and the more meaningful ones, they really build elaborate worlds, but then tear them apart. The world is full of lies, and the villains are those who have, often starting with good intentions. They have grown corrupt because they have refused to rely on others. They might exploit others, they might manipulate others, but they never trust, you know? And so what I want to encourage in gameplay, so this is the kind of game that kind of wants you to be a JRPG hero within the game, but also at the table. What I really want is for people to trust each other, trust each other's ideas, and more importantly, trust their own vision about a world, about a fantasy, about a possibility. That's why my heart kind of aches when people say, no, but my players like they don't feel like they would contribute anything interesting to the world. They prefer the game master to just do the entire world building and then act within it. It's not that the game won't work in that case, but it's just that you are seeing the challenge, and I don't mean challenge as something negative, I mean challenge as an opportunity to experiment and grow and make mistakes. You are seeing it and you're just surrendering. You're just, no, I won't try. And while I understand it, especially since games are games, so you are meant to have a good time, and if challenging yourself is not your idea of a good time, well, but I do think that that most of the game's potential gets wasted that way. Because yes, the game is fun to play during conflicts. It has all the combos, the builds. I really wanted it to be, both a narrative experience. Well, I hate saying narrative because it doesn't really mean anything in RPGs. Let's say an emergent storytelling experience in which you kind of act like a fan fiction author. Like, what's the Final Fantasy that I would always want to make or play? And then you have the tactical aspect in which you really, you get with each other, you say, okay, you can do this action, all right, then on my turn I will do these. And you do have to do that because the average difficulty of the game is pretty high. But it's not high to punish you, it's high to force you to work together. But I do get that some people, like, it's the same reason why some people adore games like Dark Souls or Shin Megami Tensei, and other people are completely put off, you know. So yeah, in a way, it could be said that it's kind of like playing Dark Souls with cheats that give you infinite health. You can do that, and I'm pretty sure that Miyazaki won't come and beat you up because you did that. But you decided not to interact and engage with the game, which is a valid choice. But what I don't want it to become is the norm. I kinda would prefer for the norm to be the intended experience, as tough as it is. Oh, okay. I didn't see the question from Milkomatic. I'm sorry. How often do I have full combat? What is the right balance between combat too often and not enough? It really depends on the pacing of the campaign. My first campaign with Fabula, we kinda we tended to play 2.5 to 3.5 hours, and it was very often a session with zero conflicts or a minor conflict, and then the next session would have the important conflict with a villain. You could see it as a session of build up, like one session resolves the previous conflict, wraps it up, and builds up to the next one, and then the other session is the intense session when you have the conflict, and maybe it's a conflict that can take even up to 2 hours if it's a conflict with several phases. Again, conflicts are meant to be important scenes, like really important, and that's why they take the liberty to last long, because a conflict is basically a game a game experience, a game activity in and of itself. And thanks, Braden, for following. Um, so the idea is that while they may be long, you're always focused on what's happening. That's also why actions are alternated between the player characters and their allies and the enemy. That's so that you are always on the edge of your seat. That's the same reason why characters can exchange their position during the round. You don't you don't know whether you'll be waiting 4 turns before it's your turn, or if you're gonna have to act immediately when the new round begins because there is a crisis to resolve. That's why enemies are powerful. That's why they deal significant damage. That's why healing is strong in Fabula Ultima, because you're always thinking tactically, at least you're supposed to always think tactically and always have a new crisis to resolve round after round. You can't just, cast on yourself 10 different buffs before the combat begins, because a conflict is a scene and effects last until the end of the scene. So you will never be able to precast something on yourself. You have to do that when you're already in danger, when things are already in the thick of the action. And all of these design choices are basically the fruit of 5 years of testing and messing up and seeing a bunch of stuff that just doesn't work. And seeing it not work in Fabula, in the playtest, seeing it not work in other games. Obviously, when I play a game, I can't help but look at it in a professional or working mindset. And that's why I'm not really interested in Fabula Ultima being regarded as something innovative in terms of, well, none of its elements are really, particularly innovative. I'd say that they were a lot more weird and unseen before when I started working on the game. In the meantime, it's been half a decade, and luckily the role-playing game world has grown. Like, many games have come out. A friend of mine jokes that I should have probably released the Fabula Ultima already 2 times. Uh, like, it would be time for a second edition. But the fact is that what you are playing today is already a second edition. The first edition was what happened on Patreon, what evolved through the feedback of the community. And so yeah, if it's this polished, it's really because I have taken an unreasonable amount of time. And even so, it's definitely not perfect. There are bits that I would like to change, and we'll see. I'm kind of trying to use the various source books and expansions to go more in depth about certain styles of campaign. it's possible that adventures, but yeah, I'm gonna have to do this because you can't really write an adventure for Fabula Ultima. You can't really write a scenario. The tutorial has a scene by scene system, but that only works because it's a tutorial. After that, if I forced, iconic non-player characters or specific plot points that cannot be avoided, that would be in direct contradiction with what is written in the core book. So, how were the pillars born? How should you use them to build a ward, and is it okay to use a pre-existing ward? Going back to my previous conversation, is it okay to use a pre-existing ward? Well, it is and it isn't, depending on whether you can connect your characters to that ward and whether you can abandon the idea that that ward will remain, as you know it. JRPGs are revolutionary pretty much intrinsically, and that's also a point that makes them different from anime. But JRPGs are about changing the world. So if you really love a given world, I don't know if it's a good idea. Maybe you won't feel too good about how it will be inevitably be changed by the actions of the player characters. And yeah, absolutely, no one is going to stop you. Like there is no RPG police. The pillars were born by me basically watching and playing 1,000 different JRPGs or related games and trying to dissect what was, fundamental for the experience. If something is in the pillars, okay, actually, I'm gonna put things into perspective for you, because one thing that I've seen and heard written and said about Fabula Ultima is that it's really weird for someone like me, a person who mostly made one-page RPGs or very short RPGs, to suddenly come out with a 360 pages book. And that's funny because, well, there isn't, as I just told you, there isn't much sudden about Fabula Ultima. It's been years and years and years and years. Um, but I wrote Fabula Ultima the same way that I write a one-page RPG. Every single comma, every single title, every single section, every single word is as dry and as simplified as it can be. This means that every sentence in those 360 pages is relevant. There is nothing you can skip. And if that sounds intimidating as hell, you're right. Like, I had to stop myself at a certain point because there was so much to say, so much to write, so much to include, that I had to surrender to the idea that I had to write expansions. And this was actually before the publisher got involved. That's another thing that's really funny to me, because some people say that, like, they think that the publisher commissioned the game to me, which isn't what happened. Like, Fabula Ultima was something that I began working on fully believing that it would have never been published because it was just too expensive and it needed too many strokes of luck to come out. So in a way, I think we are kind of doing the impossible with this product. It's tough. It's tough to find artists. It's tough to follow them. I'm basically the only fixed person on the Fabula team. I am doing art direction, creative direction, writing direction, and all of this is fundamentally unadvisable if you were a pragmatic person. But yeah. And the pillars, that's the reason I said this, is the pillars really are me reducing the elements that are necessary for Fabula Ultima to work and trying to fit everything into 2 pages. So, you know, you could strip conflict rules from Fabula Ultima and it would still be Fabula Ultima. You can't touch a pillar without it no longer being Fabula Ultima. That's how extreme the role is. I also envision shared world creation as more important than the entirety of the classes, for instance. Because the point of the game is, yes, to let you have fun with, combos and synergies and that stuff, but the point of the game is to get a group of people to trust their own creativity and each other's creativity and never be the absolute authority about anything. That's also why the game says that you have to get the approval of the entire group for any kind of house rule. And some people might, disagree, but personally, games and game writing is my way to do, well, activism in a way, uh, social activism, and trying to bring a certain kind of light into the world. And my way of doing it, at least what I believe, is trying to strengthen mutual trust and also trying to remove power from figures of authority. So my ultimate goal is for the game master to feel like, at most, an asymmetrical player, but definitely not the event organizer, definitely not the campaign organizer. They just have different responsibilities. Well, Baido, you are not wrong, honestly. Um, Let me check some of the comments because I tend to talk too long. Now you realize what I mean when I say that I have trouble just replying to something with 4 lines of a message on Discord. Um, Definitely, Braden. As soon as you play into a world, like the mere act of being there in a given moment is already changing that world, which is why I find it kind of useless to try to use a pre-existing world unless you really basically write an entire new expansion of that world. And it's doubly important because with the way players have responsibilities in the game, and actually, let me go to the page. Like, we have the pillars, but let's go to player responsibilities. Like, the first responsibility is to read this book, which is already something that many people are like, oh yeah, many players will not do that. My personal answer would be to play a game that works without players reading the book. Dungeons and Dragons does have that expectations, for instance. Even Monster Arts includes a section on how to facilitate the game and not have players really read all the rules. Exactly, I'm as verbose as I feel like. It's terrible. Um, but yeah, I wouldn't play Fabula Ultima with people who don't read the book. But that's not because it's Fabula Ultima. I wouldn't play Blades in the Dark with people who don't read the book. Because that game needs people to read the book. Otherwise, the game master or whoever read the book, it kind of has to become, not only a facilitator, but kind of their wiki for what they should do, how they should risk, what the stakes are in a given situation. And it's just, no. Um, and then there is, well, gathering the proper tools, whatever. Creating the game world is a responsibility, and choosing an archetype for the group is a responsibility. Creating your heroic character is a responsibility. Cooperating is a responsibility. And up to this, it's pretty, it's kind of obvious. But contributing to the ongoing story is something I really want to stress is important. Because at the same time, play as a hero and play to change and evolve. Note how this means that if your character is still the same person at the end of a Fabula Ultima campaign, you are going against your responsibilities. Okay? And yeah, Baidu, every TTRPG is a collaborative activity, but not all RPGs are made equal. And that's another point that I kind of have to elaborate on. When I talk about RPGs, I intend a TRPG, its system, its presentation, its illustration, okay, every aspect of the item. That thing is a player at your table. When you bring a given game to your table, that game is playing. And you kind of have to cooperate with the game too, because it's kind of like a person, a system that has expectations and needs. And I'll be the first to admit, the first time I played through a full campaign of Fabula Ultima, I had not understood what I had written. Because that's another thing that maybe game designers don't tell you, usually. But most of the time, we don't understand the game we have written until we dive face first into it and it begins punching us in the face. Because our brain creates the game, but doesn't really understand all the implications. Okay? And the first time I played Fabula Ultima, I made so many mistakes. Like, the second time I played with the same group, as a player character, by the way, not as the game master, which is another important switch. It's very good in Fabula Ultima to see both sides of the experience. It was a blast. It was a blast because we were all very much aware of what would and wouldn't work and what the game expected from us. And what's funny is that all these expectations, I had written them in the text, but I still had, this kind of baggage from other games that prevented me from actually engaging with the game the way myself wanted me to engage with the game. So I can absolutely understand people being, in trouble. And I want to go to the Game Master section about the cooperate and play to find out what happens. This stuff, it's tough if you are a forever game master for other games. It's tough, but it's the key to the game. And that's why the game master doing the world building, for me, is so against the spirit of a game that is about revolution and tearing down authority. Like, you really run the risk of players either not embracing their role as a revolution for good in the world, or you run the risk of players taking it too seriously and it becomes a clash between players and game master instead of a collaboration. So yeah, it's a big game. It's a really big game. It's true. It's a small book, and the text is, well, actually, let me make you angry by showing an English copy, an English physical copy of the game. The reason I have it is because I was at Essen in October. But you see, it's not a big game, and the text is reasonably large. And I did that because I consulted with people who have struggled seeing or have issues like dyslexia, and I tried to choose colors and make spacing that helped them. Obviously, it won't help everyone because different kinds of difficulties really need serif or sans serif fonts, but I tried my best to make it, easily digestible. That also means that it's a fairly thick book. Like, it's this large. Well, Turgeman, a part of me really agrees with you. At the same time, I do know that the publisher does rely on all recycled paper. So, like, they are taking measures to be as environmentally friendly as they can. What really isn't environmentally friendly, in my opinion, is the shrink wrap. That bit of plastic is is something that the entire gaming world has to come to terms with. We need to find different solutions for that. Then again, I open Kickstarter and there are 1,000 board games filled with plastic figures, which I no longer purchase for very much for that reason. And at the same time, I can't stand tabletop games being not physical because it's not really an attachment to tradition. It's the fact that you have them be a physical presence at the table and you gather around them, kind of like a bonfire. And I really need, especially after the whole COVID lockdown thing, I think we really need to get in touch with each other physically, be in the presence of each other. So yeah, though the shipping is also, let's not get, let's not start that topic. But I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying. Just yeah, I know. Another thing that I'm working on is making everything Creative Commons for different reasons. I couldn't do it for Fabula. I know people ask about a third-party license, and we will hopefully figure something out. Remember, very small team. We don't have time to do pretty much anything, and we already struggle with just the basic demand. But for Fabula, yeah, the high fantasy one is out in Italian. This is it. You can see it's a much smaller book. Maybe, well, okay, yeah, you can see it now. It's 200 pages, and I don't know like how the translation is going for this one. Show the inside. Yes, I can show the inside. I can show you the introduction illustration. This is from Cafe Frame, and I can show you. I could show you the classes. We also have one thing that we put in the source books is examples of characters that match this kind of specific mood or narrative, and they are not focused around the build in terms of classes. They are focused around the type of story that the character brings to the table, and the theme, the identity, and what the game master and the rest of the group should do to help the person who is playing this kind of character. We have 10 of them. In terms of classes, let's see. Well, we have our favorite crowd pleaser, the chanter, who is quite clearly an idol. We have the commander. These illustrations are all by Morio. We have the dancer, which has quickly become a fan favorite, and I'm really happy about that, because this is by far the character that I have spent the most time during art direction for. And this is the symbolist, our resident Leonardo da Vinci. And well, I could, yeah. I'm also gonna show you one of the villain illustrations. This one is by far my favorite. Oh wow. What's the thought process behind the creation of a new class? It's pretty simple, actually. And by simple, I mean it's a mess. Well, a new class to exist has to answer yes to two questions. Is this a common enough archetype in JRPGs that cannot be made by combining existing classes? And the second question is, does this archetype allow for the exploration of a completely new mechanic, a completely new playstyle? It has to say yes to both in order to happen. So, for instance, well, you know, high fantasy classes, Chanter, the only class that has a sort of modular spell casting, and also the kind of bard that I always wanted bards to be. Once again, bear in mind, it doesn't have to mimic a JRPG class in mechanics. It has to mimic an archetype, but the mechanics need to be fun in a tabletop way. So Chanter, for instance, explores this kind of modular casting playstyle, and also has the difficulty to either target one creature or all allies or all enemies, which makes it tough to, do an AoE if some of the elements absorb an element. Some of the enemies absorb an element while others are vulnerable. It's kind of the Shin Megami Tensei Persona enigma of, do I actually use the AoE spell if I don't know how enemies are going to react? And narratively speaking, well, the idol, the singer, they are archetypes that are absolutely present in JRPGs. And I wanted music magic to be a thing. Why it goes into high fantasy? Well, because it's a more wondrous kind of class. Commander. Well, Commander is a mix of the Kaiser from Bravely Second and the Warlord from Dungeons & Dragons 4th edition. So it brings the unique challenge of having effects that affect allies and enemies, so you have to use proper timing. And Commander is also a kind of character that is pretty common, especially I'd say that the Sovereign in Etrian Odyssey was also a big inspiration. Plus, I wanted a class that could have, could be combined with Wayfarer in order to have a companion and fight alongside the companion. So since the companion is an ally, you can, with Commander, make an attack and then select the companion for another attack, kind of going for a pincer move. Dancer Dancer is a very common archetype in JRPGs, but I wanted to turn it on its head and also make the Dancer kind of an acrobat duelist. And mechanically, it's built on the idea of sustained auras, kind of stances, but it also has to change the dance in order to spend fewer mind points. So you have to dance. As a player, your mind has to dance. Similarly, with the Commander, your mind has to be that of a strategist to use the more complex abilities. Commander is really a class that shines depending on who your allies are, which is exactly what a Commander should be in a JRPG. They are not someone who solves the situation, they are someone who has gathered the proper allies and supports them. Create opportunity for others. That's the kind of leader you want the Commander to incarnate here. That's another point. The class has to be anti-authoritarian, anti-capitalist, anti-exploitation. That's why we won't have a tamer class, because in Fabula Ultima we know that all creatures are made of soul, all creatures have a conscience, as Chimerist says, because you can communicate verbally with beasts. So you can't have a class that enslaves other creatures. And I actually have the Asians Represent community to thank for this one, because at the time we had a long conversation about the possibilities. And in the end, I went with the Faithful Companion because that's not, a servant, that's a companion you have at your side for life. So that's the kind of, Thea Merchant is gonna have a rebuild in the future. It's gonna have a rework, uh, to make it even more not about the money, which seems silly, but the merchant should be built as a way for people to communicate and trade information, goods, and culture. It should not be built on accumulation of wealth. Uh, so these are the kind of challenges that I face when I choose classes. Symbolist again has the unique characteristic of creating buffs and debuffs that last after the end of the scene. They are in theory permanent. Um, and aesthetically, the idea of the runesmith, or even the character who uses ink and paper to write talismans, is something that is very much present in JRPGs. Now, to be honest, through the mystical art of reskinning, you could actually use the core book classes to already do pretty much everything. Like, we just talked about the exorcist writing talismans. Well, honestly, spiritist with the spells that cause status effects could just be, described as talismans flying on the enemy and applying the status. So the classes aren't obligatory to actually play a certain concept. Unless they are. For instance, in Techno Fantasy, we have the pilot, which is something that really couldn't be done before. Mutant is also something that couldn't be done. It explores the idea of sacrificing hit points to kind of take on different forms, and it also allows you to boost unarmed strikes, which wasn't really something that could work before. And then we have the Esper, former Psychic, which kind of forgets we are playing a turn-based game and starts working on interrupts and triggered reactions. It's kind of playing like, it's not really an action game, but the Esper, especially with one of the new heroic skills that are going to come out, which lets you apply your powers to others, they are really always looking at what's happening on the scene. So yeah, this is what drives the design of classes, and you have to be careful because since every class will stack, they are cumulative with each other. You can't just give a class this one skill from, I don't know, sharpshooter. Like, you can't, because at that point they would be able to do the class twice when the trigger happens. Sorry, do the skill twice when it happens. Or imagine having two classes with adrenaline. You would be able to inflict 20 extra damage when you are in crisis. So nothing has to. Some things are okay to have them stack with each other. All sources of extra damage, for instance, work that way, which is why in the late game, martial characters tend to be the DPS because they have had the time to stack enough bonuses to damage, and now they deal the same damage as a caster but without the MP expenditure. Early game, the caster is absolutely the king or queen of damage, and especially of elemental effects. So the game definitely has some quirks, and when you design classes, you have to be mindful of them. Uh, what other custom variant rules are gonna be present in the High Fantasy Sourcebook? Uh, the High Fantasy Sourcebook contains the very same rules that were present in the playtest. I'm not sure you were there for the playtest, So I'm gonna list them briefly. Um, the first rule is custom weapons, and actually custom weapons is a bit of a unique uh, optional rule. Well, one of the reasons is that it's not really optional. Like, they are okay to include in any kind of campaign. Also, it's a rule that is going to be repeated in every source book. All three of the source books are going to contain the rules for custom weapons, but they are going to contain different examples of custom weapons depending on the genre. And this is done because we don't assume people to buy all the source books. You know, maybe they're just into techno fantasy, they don't really care for high fantasy. Now, it's their loss because classes are meant to be compatible across all genres, and honestly, playing a commander or a chanter in a techno fantasy setting is pretty cool, like playing the idol with maybe the drones who act as amplifiers. Um, so yeah, some things are going to be repeated, but then you see after the rules we have the various examples of custom weapons. In this case, the custom weapon is the one used by Arion, which is the Oni dancer. Um, then we have quirks. Quirks are going to be present in all books. Some of the quirks are repeated if they work well with the different genres. For instance, the robot quirk is actually present in all three books. However, while the mechanical aspect is the same, the questions that the quirk asks are going to be different depending on the genre. Because playing a robot in a high fantasy game is not the same, thematically speaking, as playing a robot in a natural or techno fantasy setting. So we do go into the detail, of providing you with questions who let you place the quirk within the setting. Great idea for a villain YouTuber. Well, I would be lying if I didn't say that the techno fantasy book is probably gonna count as sedition. I don't know. No, but it really goes in depth about some of the darker possibilities of Fabula Ultima, and especially the ways that the stream of souls can be used. Because the stream of souls, once you consider that all people are bound by this network of soul energy, that kind of becomes, internet or cyberspace. It absolutely should play that role. Starships could warp jump among the stars by going through the soul network. So villains are definitely going to build technology or use technology that manipulates the soul network. And I don't think I have to say how this can mirror the actual acts of misdirection, misinformation, and social manipulation that can happen in the real world. So, techno fantasy is definitely the kind of genre where on the first page we say, well, this can get pretty serious. Please talk about, your boundaries, your safety, because it's gonna get tough. Like, if you think about Xenosaga or Xenogears or Final Fantasy VII, that's not the kind of world that can really be saved. Like, the world is lost, and the best you can do is build a hope for what comes after. And I think that's a style of gameplay that can be extremely empowering because it's still, a fantasy at its heart. You can change the world for the better, but at the same time, it's gonna be pretty heavy. Yeah. Final Fantasy VII is it's I would say the main pillar of techno fantasy for me, and the protagonists are, well, they are terrorists, so it doesn't shy away from tough stuff. It doesn't shy away from the tough questions. It does kind of lose itself a bit, and I think it's significant that many people believe that Sephiroth or Genova are the biggest evil in Final Fantasy VII, when it's pretty clear that Hojo and Shinra are way worse than just, an alien that is instinctively consumes planets, or a person who was basically built to feel certain types of sentiments and emotions and was experimented and tampered with. So yeah, techno fantasy is gonna be tough. Another rule, going back to the topic of high fantasy, another rule in high fantasy is zero powers. And zero powers are fundamentally special skills, ultimates, limit breaks. You can call them however you want. And these are the same as they were in the playtest, except for the presence of two variants. We have, we also have a random chart that lets you randomly generate the name of your finisher move. And we have two alternatives that are awakened powers. Basically, you don't gain the power at character creation. You gain it as a third alternative when you are defeated. Like you can once per campaign get back on your feet and immediately charge your superpower. Or when a tragic or especially important event for your character happens in the story. The player's final say on when they want to bring the power into the game. And you will notice that players have final say about most things that pertain to the character. And that's why I say that really having players that don't want to engage with the storytelling aspect and the drama aspect, I don't think it's gonna work in the long run, because so many things are there for players to, get their pencil out, get their pen out, and write the story alongside everyone else. And then the last option is combined powers. So basically, instead of each character having a power, each pair of character has a power. And when both of their clocks are full, they can unleash the power together. It's fairly complicated, and honestly, we suggest that you only use it in groups of 4 or fewer player characters. You know what, Braden? They will make characters stronger. It really depends on how much the players optimize on those powers. I also have to say that absolutely, it's a Xenoblade free rule, and also the option to awaken the power when you are in a difficult spot. That's also from Xenoblade 2, actually. Because I watched Xenoblade 2 and I was like, man, this is way more like an anime than a JRPG. Like, these people, every time they are about to fail, even the scripted loss turns into, I manifest a new power. And so I said, you know what? It's the high fantasy book. People should have the ability to play the super easy campaign where they can just steamroll stuff and feel powerful. That's okay in high fantasy. And Braden, to go back to the answer, yes, player characters are going to be more powerful, but to charge a power, you will probably be in the third or fourth round of the conflict. So in most cases, what happens is you're just getting done with the conflict quicker when it was already reaching its conclusion, or you can turn the tables on the enemy when you were about to lose. So yes, they are pretty much like, I would say that it's kind of having a heroic skill from the start. But it's not really like, people think too much about levels and stuff like that in Fabula, when honestly most of the difficulty comes from how tough to read the enemy is, how powerful their moves are, and how they interact with the group. The resistances, the vulnerabilities, For instance, if vulnerabilities and resistances constantly change, in theory, the enemy always has the same amount of vulnerabilities and resistances. But merely by the fact of changing all the time, you are adding, a layer of confusion and doubt that makes the entire scene a lot more difficult to approach. Actually, the Game Master screen includes a little booklet actually, that provides examples of boss gimmicks, boss mechanics, and stuff like that, and really goes more into detail about this stuff. Because one admission I have to make is that I always write games for a target audience. Okay, I don't write games so that everyone can play them. I write games for a specific kind of person. Fabula Ultima is written for people who maybe never played tabletop RPGs, but they know JRPGs. They know the tropes, they know how a JRPG works. The game is now popular enough that people who have no JRPG experience and have a lot of tabletop RPG experience are coming in touch with it, and obviously they don't understand it. Not because they are, stupid or anything. I'm not saying that. I'm saying the game is not written towards those people. And so obviously they have a hard time. So we are using the following books to kind of go more, to clarify some things, to make some tropes and dynamics more explicit. Because some people might be used to D&D or Pathfinder and to a completely different kind of story, of dynamic, of role of the characters. Some people expect to have a quest giver that tells them what to do. Fabula lets you decide what to do, but that might feel like an absence of an element instead of simply a different experience. So we have to spell out more stuff. Continuing with the optional rules, actually I think we are kind of done. What is also present in the book is 24 heroic skills that were also in the playtest. And I know 24 is a lot. Don't expect other books to have just as many. The reason there are so many is that the book has a heroic skill for every weapon category. I couldn't fit them in the core book, but I wanted each category to kind of feel different and allow for different synergies, so I decided to do that. Last prompt. What makes a good villain? How do you handle multiple encounters without having the conflict feel the same every time? When a villain should surrender and when escalate? What makes a good villain? That's in the book, but if I had to really summarize it, a good villain is not about the story the game master wants to tell. A good villain is about what the player characters incarnate in terms of themes, in terms of role in the world. If you have the princess who lost her kingdom, then there should be a villain who was present. If you have someone who is vengeful, you should have a villain who has been consumed by vengeance, or someone who has been led to the path of, evil, but more like negativity and destruction and despair by someone else's vengeance. A villain is only interesting if it tells the story of the characters. And that's the biggest difference from classic RPG villains. A villain cannot exist without the player characters existing in Fabula Ultima. That's what makes writing adventures tough. By design, again, the game is designed to break if you try to do that stuff. And how do you handle multiple encounters without having the conflict feel the same? You change the stats. Villains should never appear twice with the same exact stats. You should change their abilities, you should give them new stuff that they do, but you should keep some elements familiar. One of these elements specifically is elemental affinities. If the villain has a strong affinity for ice, keep that. Keep that affinity unless they are the supreme villain and like the last battle has to, completely turn everything on its head. And when should a villain surrender and when should they escalate? Honestly, escalation is twice per campaign. Escalation, when you use escalation, you are telling the group that they failed. Like their approach was so headstrong or so misinformed that by defeating the enemy, they actually drove that enemy deeper into obsession. And that really doesn't feel good. Like it's the biggest failure for the heroes when a villain escalates. Um, I would say that the choice of spending Ultima points, having the villain escalate, having the villain flee, you are not you're not obligated to spend all the Ultima points for a villain or to have them flee if they can. Like it's perfectly okay if through their words and their actions the players have, because you know the psychology of your villain. You know what your villain cares about. They are people. And so if the players actually provide a solution to the problem that the villain was trying to solve with force, they might very much change their mind. You don't need to necessarily extinguish all the Ultima points to get to that point. What is sure is if they end their Ultima point, they are now a normal NPC. That is sure, unless you escalate. But depending on the length of the campaign, like I think it's really unlikely for a campaign to keep its strength and its pacing and its intensity and having more than a couple escalations. Because escalation is, especially if you are the kind of game master who is conservative with Ultima points, and you shouldn't be, honestly. Maybe the mastermind villain could be conservative, but they should probably be major or supreme, which also makes sense for them to be conservative. A minor villain who becomes a major villain who becomes a superior villain, that's going to be 30 Ultima points throughout the career. A villain who starts already at the top has 15, so they do need to manage them more carefully. Then again, it really depends on the kind of JRPG. Like I'm recently watching a Trace of Cold Steel playthrough, and that game has villains who appear like 5 or 6 times, while other JRPGs have villains who they just appear once and you beat them. So you should not have Ultima points dictate when to make a villain surrender. And you shouldn't make a villain overstay their welcome. The same is true for players with player characters. If a player character has exhausted their narrative arc, you should just let them go. You don't have to keep them here just because. Like, give the heroes the ability to rest, bring in new people, new heroes, show that the world has many heroes that can work together. Or uh, maybe work with the group to give your hero a new motivation to stick with the party. You don't have to do it on your own. It's not the game master responsibility. Just literally turn to the group and say, folks, there's no reason for Robert here to stay with the group. I really would like for the situation to evolve in such a way that Robert feels like their presence is still needed. Let's play a scene that deals with this and give Robert new motivation. The fact that the game works in scenes helps you because you don't have to weave everything together naturally. You can just end this scene and begin a different scene 18 hours later in a different situation, and that's okay. That's how the game is absolutely meant to be played. So I hope it was useful, and sorry if I kept you too long. I think I can be here for maybe another half an hour. I don't know. Then I think I'm gonna have to go to the power of self empowerment. Yes, I would say that this game is kind of about that. But contrary to other games, I tried not to. I don't want to force you to self empower. I want it to be something that, you know, rises from yourself, and then the game gives you the tools to do more of it, rather than just bombard you with, no, here you should, you should, you should. No problem, Brayden. And yeah, I hope this was cool, and I hope I will be able to do stuff like this again in the future. If anyone else has any kind of question, including, I don't know, yeah, questions about design ideas or upcoming playtest stuff, feel free to. I okay, Beto. It's cool because at least when you had a thought, you can still recall it. I I am often unable to remember what I was thinking 10 minutes ago. So it's written down, but you were in the middle of FF7 talk. Okay, let me see. Hmm. Yeah, I can't find it, so if you want to write it again, how do I consider situational modifiers? Or rather, how do you, the general user? Situational modifiers are meant to be used when you can't just adjust the difficulty. And they are meant to be used a lot, especially in open checks and opposed checks. Um, Use them to reflect the traits of the opposition. Like, for instance, if a player character uses the provoke skill from the Fury against a proud target, and the kind of provocation that they do or say is something that goes against the pride of that person, you should give a +2. During a This is especially important for non-combat conflicts, um, when working on objectives. If you use a torch to scare away a creature, and that creature is vulnerable to fire, or or has afraid of fire in their traits, that should be a +2, absolutely. And that's what makes the ability to learn creatures' traits important. No, it's definitely not just flavor. And I think it's written in the book. Let me see. Uh, yeah, situational modifiers on page 49. The very last bit in the page is, if you are the game master, use situational modifiers to reward approaches that take advantage of the opposition's traits, personality, and objectives. Traits are a major part of actually winning a social conflict, or in some cases, any kind of conflict. Let me have them. It's 360 pages. it's not your fault. Like, the best thing you can do is ask, and turns out through the conversation we find out that there was advice about that. But as I said before, there are 360 pages where pretty much no single line of text is superfluous. So I think in terms of difficulty, Fabula Ultima is on par with stuff like Burning Wheel or Legend of Five Rings 5th edition, personally. Baido, honestly, yeah, yeah. Have people absolutely haggle with you about modifiers. Or rather, it's not really about haggling, but about pointing out. Uh, you said that this enemy has this kind of trait. Can this be useful? Your Arcanist player feels like stat blocks and class requirements are a little too rigid when creating characters. Like marshals are usually Dex plus Mig, while characters are Ins plus willpower, and it's harder to go out of the mold. Yeah, in the core book, maybe. Once you throw in custom weapons and the various classes that are present in the expansions, you get less of that. Although I have to say that for me, but it's also funny that that I think you used the feminine. Yes, it's funny that she thinks that when she's an Arcanist, because Arcanist is just willpower, literally no use for insight. While on the other hand, a duelist relying on a katana is gonna use insight a lot more than an Arcanist. And in fact, you could have a build with knowledge is power from the lore master that is an excellent tank and is only insight and willpower. You compensate low dexterity with a martial armor, and you don't use mind points, so you don't really need a good willpower. So you're probably gonna be dexterity 6 and insight 10, and probably 8 might and 8 willpower, and you're gonna be a good tank with very good magic defense. El Condor Pasa, there are and there are not Fabula Ultima expansions. Specifically, there are playtest materials on Patreon, and actually, let me be a somewhat decent self-promoter and let me link to you the post. Note that all these playtest materials are free. Okay, you don't have to be a patron. They are on Patreon, but you don't have to be a patron for them. These are playtest materials, and they cover techno fantasy and natural fantasy. The previous iteration of the document was also containing high fantasy content, but it was removed when the Italian high fantasy expansion came out. However, since it was public content, if you are on Discord or like people can share it with you. I took it down because as per agreement with the publisher, once an expansion is published, it does have to leave playtest. Although in the next update I'm going to bring back the custom weapons rules, because some of the playtest options for techno fantasy and natural fantasy rely on custom weapons, so I can't take those rules out, even if they are theoretically no longer playtest. In combat, would you allow players to argue that they get +2 based on how they narrate their action, or would that break the game if it gets too much? It's not really meant to work that way in terms of situational modifiers. Like, to get a situational modifier, you don't hand them out like candy, okay? Situational modifier is, it means that there's a relevant aspect. As I mentioned before, traits are a good guideline. Traits are what is really important about the NPC in question. So if the NPC has a trait like, let's go with the previous example, afraid of fire, it would make sense for a fire-based attack to have a +2. That would be okay. But remember that giving situational modifiers is ultimately something that the game master does. Okay? Fabula Ultima does not give the game master power over the rules. It does give the game master final say on some elements, and it gives players final say on different elements. For instance, the game master can never tell a player, no, you cannot spend a Fabula point to invoke this bond or this trait because it doesn't make sense to me. The player has final say, and with final say we mean responsibility to frame the Fabula point expenditure and the invocation of the trait or bond in a way that makes the story better. Because remember, the win condition of Fabula Ultima is have a good time together and tell a memorable story. If you are telling a slapstick comedy story, you are no longer winning Fabula Ultima. If you are not having a good time together, which isn't having fun, because fun is very different, it's about the atmosphere. Like, if you want to sit down together next time, if everyone wants to sit down together next time, that's winning. If you don't want, you are losing. And so when you use the more freeform elements like projects or rituals or situational modifiers, you should really work to make the experience as good as it can be for everyone else, even more than for yourself. So that's the general mindset that you should have, which is an act of responsibility. Everyone in this game is responsible. The responsibility for the quality of the session doesn't rest on a single person. It's everyone. Which also means as soon as one of the, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 people you play with is not on the same page, the game breaks. You're gonna have a bad time. Which means it's, on average, I guess, 4 more times more likely to... a campaign is 4 times more likely to blow up when compared to a game that is rigidly in the hands of the game master. But to me, playing tabletop RPGs isn't, it's not a job. You don't have to come to the conclusion of the campaign. You don't get a special cookie or a special prize. It's about enjoying the most of the game and the company right now. So if a campaign blows up because the people weren't in harmony with each other, I consider it a success. If they weren't able to actually come to agreements, it's better than to play and suffer, basically. That's my idea. Some people will likely disagree about that too. Okay. Oh, the Pokemon stuff. The Pokemon stuff is interesting. Some of the people who are following the stream or maybe watching this in the future, they might not know. In Italy, we had a collaboration with Nintendo for the launch of Bravely Default 2, and then exactly, Librarian Andrea. No gaming is better than bad gaming. I also want to add, but this is gonna be more controversial, you don't play to have fun, you play to play. Which kind of translates to, if you are not engaging meaningfully with the game, you're not really playing. And that one, I know, is gonna ruffle some feathers. You should absolutely play a game just to, what's the term? There's a term in English. Well, anyway, like if you're tired or something, you don't have to engage too meaningfully with the game. There are games that are built to be engaged with in a not meaningful way. But in general, I feel like the act of play should be meaningful. Well, Turgman, if a host or master of ceremonies or GM gives 10 hours of prep to the game each week, and they buy all the stuff and the server, if they are doing that for Fabula, they are going way outside of the responsibilities that they have. They are taking on an additional load, and I honestly don't advise that. I don't. I don't because it's not a job, and if you feel like you need a compensation, this is no longer a game. You are no longer playing. At that point, maybe advertise yourself and your game as a professional game master, and then you can expect a compensation because you are providing a service. But playing a game as the game master is not providing a service. That's written nowhere in any book. Okay, and I hold the games that expect the game master to be an organizer into some measure of contempt, because they are really it's a surefire recipe for burnout. About the Fabula Pokemon stuff, yes, there were these two collaborations. One was for the launch with Bravely Default 2, and that actually came out before the core rulebook in Italian. And then we had one for Pokemon Legends Arceus or Arceus. I don't know how it's pronounced in English. The point is, those collaborations were with Nintendo Italy, so the Italian branch. So in a way, they are regionally locked, which means they are in Italian. They are available for free on NetGames Fabula Ultima.it, so the Italian side of the Fabula site. A fan translation of those would be like, fans and communities are free to do whatever, but we are not free to do an English version of those, because that would require an agreement with Nintendo International, which, as I'm sure you can understand, is a very different experience, and it has a very long approval process. So if we were to do an official game or module or content, one that is, not just a free download, but is maybe a full release, then that could be the case. But now we're not really able to do something like that. Let me have them. Yes, this is going to be recorded. At least the VOD is gonna be here on Twitch, and I'm trying to figure out how to download it from the VODs in order to have it available in the future. If it's not, well, I'll try to do better next time. But have a nice day, and thanks for tuning in. I think it's very likely to stuff for stuff to be fan translated as the community grows. And another thing that I want to stress out, much like it is for the Italian side of the community, the Italian community for Fabula Ultima has a Google Drive server where they share pre-generated characters, they share fan-made arcana, and that folder is self-managed. It's not an official folder. It's not something tied in any way, shape, or form to myself or to NetGames as a publisher. And I'm gonna tell you, that's the best way for things to be, because that really allows the community to do whatever. They can use artwork from different IPs. They can do a bunch of stuff because it's all unofficial and completely unrelated to us. So I really look forward to the international community creating spaces like Reddit. There is a Reddit for Fabula Ultima, and it's not a Reddit I made or NetGames made. I firmly believe in communities, doing their stuff independently of the author or the publisher, and that actually saves troubles to pretty much everyone. Because, like, if something is connected to me or to the publisher, as soon as trouble happens, we are in trouble too, which also makes us more vigilant, which constricts the freedom of the community. So I'm super looking forward to people making fan made classes and stuff. Well, Bido, I can't say it's better to use my Discord or go somewhere else. One thing I will probably have to be more stern about is the posting of assets and materials from. For instance, there are people who have been posting assets from RPG Maker, and I can't really. I, I shouldn't allow any of that. Um, it's okay to, post an image from a character and crediting the source, but sharing asset packs and stuff like that, no. I already banned that kind of sharing, but I think we also have to be a bit more careful in terms of links, because sharing the asset directly or posting a link to where the asset is shared is kind of the same thing. And I'd like for that to be handled in non-official spaces. Or even better, if you don't want to get anyone in trouble, you should just do that through private messages. I once again encourage people to use assets that are meant to be used that way. On each IO, there are people selling incredible asset packs for actually very low amounts. The Akashic creatures are actually free. Their main pack is free, which is kind of incredible. Um, or you can just use, illustrations from a known franchise, but by fully admitting that the illustration comes from that. Like, and it has to be non-commercial, unofficial, all that kind of stuff. And bear in mind, it's still infringement, but the point is you have to not be harmful towards what you draw the content from or where you share it to. And one way, on the other hand, that the Discord is absolutely fine to use is sharing homebrew. That's perfectly fine. But again, I have made a space that is specifically for homebrew discussion because I don't want people to feel like they need my approval to post homebrew. Sometimes I might look at it. I might even, in one case, I have drawn inspiration for a quirk in the Techno Fantasy book from a fan-made class made by a user, and it's actually written in the playtest. But I really see the interaction with the game as something that belongs to the community. Yeah. Also, Turgman, if you are still in chat, I've read your messages. I get what you meant. Yeah, you were also meaning for other games that require more work from the game master. I still think there is a problem with how game masters are handled as a role in the TRPG space, both against and for them. Like, they have too much power and authority, and at the same time, the mechanisms that give them that power actually work to burden them with a lot of work that they could very much not have to do. So I honestly aim to design games that either don't have a game master figure, have its functions kind of broken down and distributed, or they have it but it's a game master that rotates between people, or they have it but it's really streamlined and they are playing the game instead of organizing it. And the conversation about game masters is very subjective and very long. I see some parallels between the dynamics, the power dynamics in games and the power dynamics in life, in work. That's why I said that I see game design as my form of activism. I try to not really promote, but experiment with different divisions of power in games where it's, reasonably safe. Like, the worst thing that can happen is that we no longer play this game together. But my goal is for people to envision different ways to live society as well. Very good. Session 0 tomorrow and 0 prep. What do I see a Fabula Ultima Game Master needed to do? Once again, the answer is inside the book. It's on page 244. You know what? I actually have the core book open here, so why don't I go to that? And by the way, yes, we have noticed that there are bits in which the line on the side goes above the illustration. Fortunately, it's only at like 3 or 4 times that this happens. The second print is already going to fix this. But yeah, before play, learn the rules, which doesn't mean that... honestly, it's not really about knowing everything, but more about knowing how to find the rule. The index at the bottom of the book is also going to help you. And absolutely encourage everyone else to learn the rules, because the Game Master section is called Game Master section, but the rules section is actually for everyone. And the game is, well, gamist and mechanically heavy enough that players who don't know how to make use of the rules are probably going to struggle a bit. And gather inspiration, especially if you've already talked about the general mood of the campaign. You could, start collecting images on Pinterest, or creating some kind of folder that you can share with the group. Taking a look at the different classes. This is also good because players might have, concepts in mind that match with one class that isn't immediately obvious. Like, for instance, if they want to build a Dragoon, they should look into Elementalist, because Elementalist has Soaring Strike, which is basically the Dragoon's jump. And this isn't immediately, obvious. That's why we included the sample builds, among which is the Valkyrie, which is kind of the Dragoon. But really, this is pretty much what you have to do before. I feel like for a game master playing Fabula Ultima, the best thing to do isn't to sit down and do prep, but it's to play JRPGs or watch JRPG live streams, find inspiration, kind of gather this almost like a repository of ideas, and then you just make your weird headcanons about stuff, but don't get affectionate. Like, think with enthusiasm, but also abandon this stuff with serenity. Like, if you had this cool idea in mind for a pair of villains that fight together in synergy, and they're like a brother and a sister, but the game goes in a different direction, there's always the next campaign, or maybe later on you will have a use for them. Never force your ideas into the game. And also, I feel like another thing that is important is to never wait for the best occasion to bring something into the game. Maybe this is because I tend to play fairly short campaigns with Fabula, like 15 to 20 sessions, but like, this is the time to bring up that sentiment. This is the time to bring up that dilemma. Don't wait for 5 sessions in the future, because the story at the point has already gone in a different direction. Yeah. Yeah, I've made the mistake of preparing stuff, especially villains, too too much into detail twice, and I'm not gonna do it again. These days, rather than prepare a specific villain, I tend to prepare an archetype, like, you know, the powerful golem. And then maybe it's a golem guarding a waterway, maybe it's the security system of the Imperial airship, or maybe it's a giant mech. It's gonna have the same stats. I'm gonna adjust the vulnerabilities and resistances depending on what it is, depending on what the party has available at the time. But that saves you a lot of trouble. I really think that the named villains that are created during world creation are the ones you should design, you should prepare about. Because honestly, if a villain has been introduced to the world by a player, those are the ones they're gonna care about. Because when I place a villain into the world, I am basically saying, you know what, I really want to punch the face of this specific toxic behavior, and I'm gonna create a villain who does that kind of stuff so that I can punch their face in the game. So I tend to give the most importance to those kind of villains, which tend to be fairly more dramatic and even, well, straight evil than what I make. Like when I make villains, they tend to be misguided. They tend to be these kind of dramatic figures, and players, when they make villains, either they want to smooch with them, like they want to have a romance with the villain, or they make them a lost family member. Obviously, your lost brother is gonna be the mysterious Dark Knight, or they really make terrible people. So I maybe it's the people I play with, but I don't find myself needing to really add that much normally. And yeah, page 245 also gives you a bit of advice on what to do during session 0, and then there is during play and between sessions. Admittedly, these are really short paragraphs, but part of me believes that if this was longer, you wouldn't read it. So I tried to really summarize it. The Game Master Kit actually features a bit more advice, so it goes more in depth about stuff. Is the map creation rule very core to the game in your opinion? I have a situation where I have a pre-made map, but not really pre-made cities. I would use that, yes. Matter of fact, I think it's inspiring to have a map that is already, it already has natural features. Don't put in cities, don't put in temples, places of interest, but it's interesting to, here there are mountains, there's a desert here. Why is there a desert? Like, use that kind of stuff to fuel the questions during world creation. Doesn't have to be a blank map, absolutely. But the important thing is for the playable features, if you want, to be added later. The natural ecosystems, on the other hand, it works very well if they are already present on the map. Yeah. And actually, let me see if I don't have it here now. I kind of wanted to show you the little booklet that comes with the Game Master screen. One moment. All right. Actually, can show you the screen as well. this is the screen. It bends to be A5 sized, so same size as the rulebook, and it's like this inside. Probably the most important thing that this has is the list of opportunities, the list of actions, the sample consequences of surrender, and it has a sort of an abridged version of non-player character creation. That's a good point, Turgeman. You know how I use the screen? I keep it open on the side for everyone to read. It's more of a basically a rules summary than a screen. It can be used to hide information, mainly when it comes to conflicts, like the stats of adversaries and stuff like that. But it's not meant to be a barrier between players and game master. And indeed, as you can see, it's really short. Like, it's not tall enough to cover you from the group. And it comes with this, which is a really small booklet, as you can see. And the booklet contains the game master advice and some random charts and generators. Like, it has random charts for dangers and discoveries during travels. It has charts for character skills and gimmicks for bosses. But I'd say that the most important advice that the booklet gives is to really let people help you. Like, if at any point you struggle as game master in Fabula, you should just ask for help. Ask players to contribute details about a setting element. Ask players how to make a Fabula point addition work into the setting. Ask players what ties them to a villain that you have no idea how to tie with. Because sometimes players in their mind already have the connection made. Like, you are here thinking, I'm really worried about Blair. Like, they never seem to be an important part of the situation. Like, they are here, they are part of the scene, but there is nothing that really... And meanwhile, the player is like, oh my god, that scene was so intense. It was so about Blair. It was so about who they are as a person. Talk. Like, that's the reason I say not to have secrets at the table. Like, the game master can obviously have mysteries, but it's less about having a big prep that the players don't know. It's that you don't know as well. You don't know what's gonna happen in the future. And you can absolutely rely on players, because it should be a journey of discovery for them and for you. But at the same time, secrets about player characters never really work. There's two ways you can handle secrets, I feel, about player characters. One is, we all know that there is a secret, and we're gonna build situations in the game about that secret. We, the players, as kind of screenwriters / audience, are going to toy around with this secret. But the characters don't know. And this is because, imagine you watch a movie, and the movie is about a bomb being put in, I don't know, a tribunal, okay? A judge court. Think if you don't know about the bomb. You basically watch lawyers and judges and trials for 2 hours, and then suddenly everyone is dead. Zero tension. If you know about the bomb, every single moment is tension. Because you know that the bomb is there, and you're like, oh my god, this character is gonna go there. Are they gonna see it? Are they not gonna see it? That's how you build tension. And that's why secrets should be kept shared in the group. Because then you can build scenes that make you go, oh my god. On the other hand, another way to have secrets is just someone spends a Fabula point and suddenly their character has a completely different meaning in the story. I had this in, well, 2 sessions ago, in the Natural Fantasy campaign we are playing. It's a live campaign. It's recorded, but it's in Italian, so sorry. And just we were facing this adversary, and suddenly one of the players spends a Fabula point to say that after defeat, when this monster kind of calms down, their face resembles that of the player character, implying that they are somehow a descendant of this creature that was suffering and imprisoned in this state of not really alive, not really dead a long time ago. Which is identical to when in a JRPG, suddenly you learn that someone who seemed to be a common mercenary is actually the second son of the king. You didn't know that before. It's just that's what a Fabula point can do. Yeah, trying to play Vampire the Masquerade style with Fabula Ultima is pretty much the equivalent of trying to pull out your own teeth, I feel. It's not really meant to work that way. The Fabula points and the classes, especially the abilities that let you ask questions directly to the game master, like you can short circuit an investigation with a single roll, and that's by design because investigations aren't meant to be the point. The point is dealing with the truth. It's the lore master, for instance, can just examine a body, and on a 13 plus with Flash of Insight, they can turn to the game master and say, okay, who killed this person? And the game master has to say, well, they were killed by the maid in the service of the emperor. And then the lore master has to explain how they figured that out. It's their job. It's not the game master's job to say, well, there is no way you could know this. No. The player who uses that ability in that way has to explain how. And that's what makes the lore master the DPS of investigation, if you want. Just like a caster should feel cool by making a ritual to stop time, the lore master should feel cool because they can figure out who did the thing just by looking at the corpse. But that's because what is really important is that we now know that the person who killed this guy is the maid in the service of the emperor. And that's a problem, because now we have to confront her, and maybe that means confronting the emperor as well. That's where the drama is. It's not 2 hours of trying to find clues. And that's because this is Fabula Ultima. If we were playing Cthulhu Dark, the point of the game would absolutely be the 2 hours of gradually finding clues, So this is what I mean when I say that different games have needs. They are an active participant at the table. And by the way, we've been up for more than 2 hours, so if you've got any closing questions, I can answer them. And other than that, I think I'm gonna close the stream. I have misspoken enough. All right. Oh, you're welcome. I enjoy this a lot more than just replying to messages on Discord. The main problem is my throat is killing me now. Water is my friend, and indeed I drink a lot of it. I have a very deep voice, so my throat gets sore easily. Conventions are a really great time for me, you can imagine. I am basically constantly eating candies for throat. All right. It seems we are done, and I will post. Actually, let me post a link to the Discord in case any of you aren't there. Oh, you're Italian too, Librarian Andrea. Okay, well then, sorry for the English stream, but I kind of wanted to have this kind of conversation with the community. Let me get the link. All right. In chat, you have the link to the Discord, and that's it. Thank you for keeping me company. I hopefully next time I'm gonna have maybe fancier setup or maybe some music to keep us company. And yeah, I think today went pretty well. So thanks a bunch, and take care, have fun, and play responsibly. Have a good one, folks.